I want to apologize for not being able to meet earlier in the week. Some technical difficulties that are still ongoing that prevented me from being here. What we'll do is we'll jump right back into something here. I want to something like these headphones. I want to have you help me do a sort of a analysis of what some say is the most important figure of the civil rights era, Martin Luther King. I want to look at some of his rhetoric today and have you all help me break him down, particularly the sort of first half of his career. So some of the first images you'll see will be some of his earliest speeches, and then we'll culminate. We should be able to get through the March on Washington speech, which is his most famous speech, but it really comes only about halfway through his career. And so we'll look at some of the later aspects of King's career later on. I want you to help me break certain things down. We've been looking at the activism of common people. Right? I wanted to start with that rather than start with King, because sometimes we mistakenly think that the movement's going to begin and end with King, and it doesn't. Even King would have been the first to say that. It does not begin or end with him. Well, some might say it ends with him, but the role of common people is particularly important. So in those Eyes on the Prize videos, the first episode really documents common people like Mose Wright. The second one documents the common activism of young children, right, trying to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, but also really the kind of backlash of common people, particularly white Southerners who really felt like their way of life was under attack. And you kind of, if you've seen that, hopefully you've seen the extremes that people are willing to go to when they feel threatened, right? When they feel like their way of life is threatened. And civil rights is going to have to find ways to deal with that. One of the ways that I think King deals with that in a kind of genius way is to frame his rhetoric in a way that he knew was going to be most successful. Right? He's going to frame his rhetoric in a way that's going to work. Right? It's one thing to do what you believe in and all of that. It's another thing to try to find a way that's going to work. If you really want to achieve change, how do you do that practically speaking? I see King, who was very much the intellectual, right? Graduate degree from Boston University. He knew how to think, and he knew how to sort of convince. So I want you to pay close attention to his rhetoric as we think about the moment that he's speaking as well. We've been doing a lot of setting up the kind of context with the Cold War, right? That's going to figure into this analysis. A lot of his rhetoric is going to fit into, I guess, a sort of American discourse of patriotism. Right? He really had an unenviable task on some levels. How do you challenge America and its very traditions, its very foundations, its whole legal system? How do you do that yet still seem patriotic? At a moment during the Cold War when to do that on any level was seen as unpatriotic. How do you do that? I think he's going to find some very specific ways to try to navigate this minefield of kind of rhetoric. Very good at it. He's very good at it. There are at least four things I want you to pay attention to in some of these speeches, and we can talk about the ones that strike you immediately. There are at least four, really more than that, things that King is going to do in his rhetoric. One of the things he's going to do in terms of his rhetoric is to speak to this American audience. The United States is a nation that's always defined itself as a Christian nation. And so what perfect way then to speak to people to get them to think beyond the immediate moment, in fact, than to use sort of religious rhetoric, particularly Christianity, right, since that is the major religious tradition of the United States. It's never been the only religious tradition here, of course, but it is the sort of major tradition of the United States. Him being a Baptist minister, he's perfectly attuned to that. He's perfectly situated to use that particular language to engage an audience. We can think about this along the lines of Imagined Community if you want to. He's able to sort of do an end run around race in reaching an imagined community of Christians. Use the rhetoric of Jesus, for example. Pay attention to how he uses Christianity, right, as one of his major weapons. And that's going to dovetail with some of the other things that we're going to see here around. Let this play because this is the intro. This is going to dovetail around into his discussion of nonviolent direct action, NVDA, I'm going to call it for short, but nonviolent direct action as a weapon, or as King says it, the weapon of love. It sounds contradictory. How do you have a weapon of love? Right? But he's going to use especially this Christian rhetoric and images and symbols in order to articulate what he sees as this weapon of love, nonviolent direct action, which is going to be his major tactical strategy throughout his career. We sort of saw in the outline how that's really the kind of second major phase. King's career will sort of overlap both the legalism phase and the nonviolent direct action phase. He becomes the predominant spokesperson for nonviolent direct action. Even when it becomes more and more unpopular by the mid to late 60s, King is still a strong advocate of NVDA, nonviolent direct action. And he's constantly reinforcing this. We'll make some points about that. So these two really come together in some ways. I mentioned this before, but he's going to use America's institutions, American traditions, American history against itself. I want you to pay attention to how he uses American traditions, institutions, the legal system against itself, right? How do you convince Americans that they're being un-American? Right? This is essentially what he's going to try to do. He's going to do it with history. He's going to do it, I sort of use contemporary hip-hop references. He samples a lot from American traditions. You'll hear him sample, say, Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, right? And use those words against themselves. How do you use those to achieve a certain level of change? So, religion, Christianity, bless you. Nonviolent direct action is a strategy. American traditions are at least the first three. There are some others that may come up. I can think of a half dozen others, but maybe one other one I want you to pay attention to, particularly in the March on Washington speech, is sort of geography. We'll come back to that one. There are others like manhood. He's going to really be articulating a new notion of manhood that kind of contradicts some of the previous notions we've seen, say in the Ethnic Notions video, right? You never see Martin Luther King wearing a sweatsuit and flip-flops, his hat on backwards. Why not? He might have liked to relax like that too, but he's going to realize that he's portraying a certain model of manhood at this moment and that it's not just about him. So these are some of the things I want you to pay attention to. I'm going to start with his earliest speeches. If you remember the chronology of this, it comes really right in the middle of this rise of the Cold War. The Montgomery bus boycott is 1955, very early, 8 years before the March on Washington speech. And King is going to be assassinated in 1968, so it's about 12, 13 years worth of career there. We're going to see some of that span.
How old was he that time?
39 years old when he dies. He never sees his 40th birthday.
When did his wife die?
Recently, sure, there's a long time. Coretta Scott King does. That's another thing about him, the sort of image of him. We tend to think of him as this older, kind of established, wise old grandfather type figure. I mean, he's 39 years old when he's dead. He's 25, 26 when he really starts with this first speech that you're going to see here around the March on Washington. I'll point out some other specific things, but keep these four or five things specifically in mind as you see these, and we can try to break down some of the ways in which he's going to use this rhetoric. And not the greatest quality. This is old VHS tape, but hopefully you can hear and see it. Yeah.